Chapter 5. Captivity Day 9. Naj Rail. The Naj Rail watched and waited. The cosmic strands twisted and warped in the distance. The disruption was familiar. It was the same feeling of the signal that had made war with the old queen. The same twisted presence which the new queen had driven out from the place where the successor was chosen. The distortion was near a system called Aspis, a place where the abrasia flowers bloom and are harvested for ambrosia. The blue stones pulsed as the darkness around them took delight in finding the enemy's lair. Once it was able, it would tell its brethren where to go to enact their revenge. Some things are worth the wait, but the Naj Rail hungered. It jumped into a shadow within a passing drone, carrying the stones with it. It rode the automated craft back to the station where it resided when it wasn't keeping the shipping lanes clear. The shadow entity knew nothing about transponder codes, nor could it understand why its last ship was targeted. Cautiously, it moved along the shadows within cooling ducts throughout the maintenance station, into a room where people were performing tasks. They were tired and their minds were weak. None of them had a ship. They were brought back and forth from the planet at the beginning and end of their time here. It reached into the mind of a worker and tricked them into entering the destination coordinates for the drone incorrectly. It sped back to where it had left the stones and waited for the machine to leave for its new destination. As the drone neared the border of the Alicia system, it was picked up by a patrol ship. The Naj Rail jumped with the stones to the shadow of a nearby crate after being brought on board. It felt a strong presence nearby with a tantalizing taste about it. "I saw that," someone said as it jumped to a shadow a little closer. The being that spoke felt dangerous and had a powerful mind. It was too risky, but its aura tasted so good, and the Naj Rail was growing tired and weak. It sped across the floor. "There you are," they said while rolling a shiny something toward it. "Tasted wonderful." "Feeling better?" the female asked as the Naj Rail hungrily drew energy from the brightly glowing soul stone. It projected a feeling of gratitude in response. They were in old Lamentic-controlled space, but the girl seemed far too small. The girl chanted softly, making the Naj Rail feel strange. "Who summoned you? Was it a Goran?" Her thoughts were being translated, but they felt Lamentic. The Naj Rail broadcast its response using the feel and sound of Kivaz's thoughts. "Need. Find cyanide help." "I can help you," the girl thought. "I am called Eris Rajuk." "What are you called?" "Darkling," it responded using Kayla's thoughts this time. "I can help. Just keep suckling on that stone and we'll get along fine, okay?" "Yes." Eris. It took a little time to coerce the shadow entity to permit Eris to hold its precious cargo. The soft glow within them was similar to the energies stored within a soul stone, yet fundamentally different. Using soul touch, they felt more like the red gems used in soul catchers. But those were empty and dull when unused or glowed evenly when full. Long ago, when she was on the run, Eris had been forced to use damaged soul stones. These blue stones reminded her of those days, and it wasn't a pleasant memory. Darkling. What a horrible name. Was it enjoying drawing from the pure energy stored within the colorless stone she'd given it? The color of a real soul stone reflected the knack of the person drained by the Lamentic's leech. The individual this one was created from hadn't had a knack, making it a less useful and effective source for her magic. It's always a good idea to have a couple as backups for emergencies. Though feeding wayward shadow entities is not the normal use, but it worked. The bits of the soul within the little blue rocks belonged to someone, and they were certainly important to her guest. She could only guess it was following the final orders of whoever summoned it, although the creature felt different from the shadow beings she'd helped summon in the past. Eris scrolled through her contact list and initiated a call. "Council Data Integrity, Jean Lavros speaking," the call recipient said. "Jean," Eris inhaled deeply so she could get it out in a single breath. "I need to contact Cyanide Etar Goran Heiser Killen Orwell Ulmaton, the unperfected, executioner of the High Court and official guardian of the Zarina." "Eris," Jean said irritably, "you know you're not cleared to contact any officials connected to." "I have something that belongs to her," Eris interrupted urgently as she focused the camera on the shadow entity. Can you either patch me through or arrange for a time for me to meet her at Yarrow's? I'll see what I can do, Jean grumbled. Do I need to remind you what happened the last time you saw cyanide? I was a head taller back then, Eris scoffed. I remember every time I look in the mirror. The exchange was arranged for that evening. Eris used the Yarrow's entry on Eden, a mere 3 hours jump away. Gowrie. The Kachina's stealth carrier emerged from jump space at the edge of the Nairobi star system. Gowrie looked over the sensors just as Tyrell had taught her. The Karzon had built a remote colony site in the remnants of the Nadrock colony site. Signals from the communication tower should have been detectable at this range, but she wasn't picking up a signal from the surface. There was a lot of movement on the medium-range scanners. She held position and watched the screen. Something was very wrong. The swarm of ships all matched the silhouette and energy profile of the ships they'd been designing at the array for the Karzon, but they had neither begun large-scale production nor provided the ships or plans to anyone. Shinji would have arrived in the Carmel system 2 days earlier in the faulty prototype. Gowrie had no way of knowing what had happened to him. Had he been captured? Tyrell had told her not to expect to see Shinji again, but the young man didn't know. Was this journey meant to be her last as well? Were these orders really from Princess Kivaza? She survived Nadrock once at the cost of her wings. Had she been sent back here to give this place a second chance to take away what little she has left and all she'd gained? As she continued to watch the screen, she started seeing subtle differences between the shape of the ships on the screen and the shape of the ships they designed. The energy output was different, but just enough that you wouldn't see it unless you knew what you were looking for. Gowrie panicked as the ship received a signal. It was an automated signal relayed through the communication tower. It was a quick non-target burst. It was just a string of characters like none she'd seen before. It took her a few minutes to calm herself back down, then she checked the message log, forwarded it to Tyrell and waited for a reply which came 20 minutes later. The Kachina's navigation computer charted course to a new destination. Another 8 jump hours further from the array. Hesitantly, Gowrie hit the button to re-engage the jump drive. She watched the swarm of ships drawing closer as the drive spooled up. The scanner array beeped just before the ship entered jump space. Those were Xenon ships. They were known to be the second-best fighter pilots in Corrales. Were the ships they were building meant to trick their enemies into thinking it was the leading phalanx of a major Xenon assault? More importantly, Gowrie checked that last set of coordinates against the star charts in the ship's database. What was this about? There's no star system there. It had been a long, lonely flight. She was already 2 standard days out, a total of 60 hours. Adding another 8 would just lengthen the trip back, but at least she wouldn't be returning alone if everything went to plan. Then again, she was supposed to be picking up a contingent of Karzon in the Nairobi system, not in the depths of space. Gowrie sighed as she unfastened the flight rig Jake and Tyrell had designed for her. She hadn't even had the chance to really fly the ship since she left. There's no real maneuvering once you enter jump space. She pulled away from the harness and felt the nerves on her back, where her wings had been, spasm. It passed quickly. She hit a button to set the ship to warn her a few minutes before re-entering real space. She walked to the back of the command cabin and opened the door leading into the carrier. Most of the barrack-style rooms were on the lower deck. There was a stairwell leading down and a hallway leading toward the back of the ship. The cafeteria was just past a secondary control room with a ladder on one side leading up to a private bunk just for her. She'd spent the majority of the trip reviewing technical courses that Tyrell had purchased for her. It was time for some private time before the ship loaded up with boisterous felines. The Karzon were a warrior species like her own, but having wings made the Sirvanas superior predators. She clicked her beak in frustration. The flight rig let her fly the ship using the nerves and back muscles that had once controlled her wings, but it just wasn't the same. Gowrie opened the hatch in the ceiling and climbed into her private room. She got comfortable on the rounded mattress and adjusted her position until it felt like she was lying in a nest. Syntholo said the trip would take 2 weeks. She'd hoped they would have heard from him or Kivaza, but there had been nothing in days. She didn't doubt his love for her. She could see it in his eyes whenever he looked at her. That little twinkle and the softness in his smile. It paled in comparison to the beautiful ferocity she saw in his eyes when they'd first met. Their biology wasn't compatible, but that didn't stop her from fantasizing. She'd done her best to console him when he talked to her about the error he had made and the possible consequences he would face once he returned to his government. Gowri sighed deeply and let out a soft forlorn squawk. At first she wanted to resent Kivaza, but the jealousy had given way to fantasies in which she was. She'd lost her wings. She'd seen some of Tyrell's research into that mutation core. There were ways to modify the core to alter a person's genome, but to fully change species would take multiple cores. Given the choice between dramatically altering herself in order to be with her beloved, forever losing the possibility of ever flying again sounded romantic, but it was just too high a price to pay for a few moments of pleasure. She'd just have to settle for a transcendent love, and fantasies in which she was the three-tailed princess taking Syntholo. She shuddered involuntarily as she clenched her taloned feet. Gowri enjoyed her privacy until she dozed off. Section break. Gowri was awakened by the warning tone sounding throughout the ship. She rushed down to the main floor to the pilot's chair and strapped herself into the harness. She had to be careful not to take back nerve-assisted flight until leaving jump space or risk moving the ship off course. She finished adjusting the rig just as the ship returned to normal space. There wasn't an entry in the computer for this region, so she would have to wait for the scanners to finish analyzing and rendering the system. The short-range scanners weren't picking anything up, so she watched the main screen to take a look while waiting for the results of the medium scan to come in. Once complete, it would overlay the external visual on the screen. All she could see were two small dim stars. At this range she couldn't be sure if they were part of an uncharted system or distant stellar objects. A light on the console was blinking. Her arrival had been detected, which meant a station or starship was running high-power sensor sweeps of the region. The ship was still cloaked, but they already knew her relative location. A second light lit up. The ship had picked up a broadcast. Answering would reveal the ship's location. She hesitantly hit the button, preparing to fly away if she had to. Her ship was unarmed. If threatened, she had no way to fight back. "Kachinas, please respond," a deep voice said over the speaker. Gowri exhaled with relief. They knew the name of her ship. These must be the people she's looking for. "This is Gowri of the Kachinas," Gowri responded. "Drop your cloak and prepare to be boarded," the voice said. She could hear someone yelling in the background as the connection went silent. Another signal came in while she was turning the ship around, preparing to retreat. Despite having second thoughts, she decided to answer. "Gowri, this is TRO on board the IS Starrunner X-42. Sorry about that, our communications officer is an idiot," a female-sounding voice purred. She heard the sound of a feline screech in the background. "Welcome to Kulkin. Would you like us to come aboard now and get on our way, or would you like to visit with us first?" The Karzan woman sounded really excited. Gowri watched as the system scan overlay loaded. It was a binary star system with two dwarf stars at its center. There was one planet close to the suns with some signs of civilization, a number of planets far from the suns that were cold and dead, and a large volcanic planet with massive amounts of tectonic activity. None of the planets here looked like nice places to visit, and certainly not to try to live there. The ship that she'd been talking to was a massive starship with an Information Society transponder. Gowri deactivated the cloaking skin. "I'll ready the docking port," Gowri chirped. "Load up your people so we can get underway. Once you get your soldiers quartered, come join me upstairs in the cockpit." "Will do," TRO said enthusiastically. "I'm really looking forward to meeting everyone. Miyako's going to be so jealous that I get to meet those Zagal team without him." The ships lined up with each other. The X-42 extended a boarding attachment that magnetically sealed to the exterior of her ship. Gowri waited for confirmation that they were ready to start the crew transfer, then pressed the button to open the airlock. Gowri pushed a button that activated a pre-recorded announcement which would play throughout the ship. She hadn't been told whose voice it was, but it said, "Everyone get settled downstairs, command staff only on the upper deck until we're in flight," in Terran Common, and then repeated it in Bestial Common, paused for a few seconds, then started over. Once she received confirmation the transfer was complete and the X-42 was ready to decouple, Gowrie closed and locked down the airlock door and pulled away. She listened to the sound of the unruly freedom fighters being guided to their rooms downstairs. If she still had wings, the top of her folded wings would be roughly the height of an average Karzan. Without the advantage of flight, she was a bit apprehensive about being on a ship full of felines. The nav computer calculated the return trip would take just under 3 days. Hopefully there wouldn't be any problems. She looked pretty burly when she puffed up her feathers, and the talons on her feet were much longer and sturdier than theirs, even if she'd had to trim the claws on her hands to make it easier to work on ships. Gowrie was startled by the sound of scratching from a few feet behind her. "Permission to enter a female voice said assertively but faltered. "What do I call that room?" "Flight room, cockpit, helm." "Just come up front," Gowrie clucked happily and motioned to a seat against the wall to her right. She couldn't turn around while connected to the harness. The ship tilted to the side as the feline jumped onto the chair, startling her. They were much smaller than she expected. Gowrie cocked her head to one side and stared at the white-furred woman. For a split second she was horrified that she might have let Cheshire on board, but her face was too wide. Maybe the records were wrong and Karzan were much smaller than she'd been led to believe. The prototype would need a major redesign if that is the case. Tro sat quietly smiling with her tail swaying back and forth behind her. "Nice ship." "Thank you," Gowrie said cautiously. "I expected you to be bigger." "I'm a pygmy Karzan," Tro said proudly and winked. "We're smaller on the outside because our brains are bigger on the inside." Gowrie wasn't sure it was a joke until the other woman laughed. Their body language and facial expressions were very different. This was going to be an interesting journey. "You have a very impressive beak," Tro grinned. "I bet you could crack a skull with jaws like that." Gowrie relaxed a little. She started turning the ship. "It's nice to meet you," Tro said formally. "Lady Darkseid and her people are doing a lot for us and we really appreciate it. I really didn't like her at first." "I know that feeling," Gowrie squawked quietly. "Considering how much good has come from it, I'm glad my brother picked her to have sex with. She's pretty decent for a Terran." Gowrie fired the retro thrusters unevenly. The ship lurched backward to one side. Had she read Kivaza completely wrong? Was that just her way of negotiating agreements with representatives from other nations? She gawked at the other woman momentarily before initiating the jump engines. Talking with this woman while hooked into the harness could be dangerous, so she asked Tro to be quiet until she was unhooked. If that is how Kivaza conducts negotiations, maybe it would be better if Gowrie doesn't take her to meet her own people. Captivity Day 10 Samari. Everything was jumbled in her mind. She had memories of a lifetime of being called Sam, but she was confident that name wasn't hers. She could feel heavy fabric against her skin weighing her down. A strip of thick black cloth was wrapped around her head, like a blindfold. "I'm getting something," a gruff female voice said. "Not bad," a gentle female voice said. "A bit unusual, but it looks like it worked." "Rituals are my specialty," a familiar-sounding woman said. Sam, not Sam, tried to move but could barely manage to twitch. "There are 2 distinct brain waves," the gruff female said. "Just keep an eye on her brain waves," the gentle female said. "We may have to go in and strip out more remnants." "I'm exhausted. I'm going to take a quick nap," the familiar woman said. "Get me if there's any change." "Go rest," the gentle voice soothed. "We may need you later." "I still think we should have purged all the old memories," a woman with a melodic voice said. "How many women are in here?" Sam, not Sam, wondered. A door opened and closed. "I heard something," the gruff woman said. "It's too early for that," the gentle woman insisted. "Alice, did you hear it too?" "No," the melodic woman. Alice said flatly, "I think Delula is hearing things." She didn't say it, she thought it, the gruff woman. Delula? Persisted. No names, the gentle woman said irritably. It will just add to her confusion. She has enough to sort out in there. Yes, Aisha, the other two women said in unison, then apologized immediately. The brain waves aren't synchronizing, Delula said. I think we should put her under and purge all the source memories, Alice said. If you think that's best, Aisha grumbled. Just be careful. Keep in mind we plan to do a memory graft once we get her body back. Until then we need the soul to be able to interact with and utilize the vessel properly. There should be some memories retained from the soul's energy signature. We need those to remain intact. Sam, not Sam, felt something cold enter in their left arm before dozing off. Section break. Are you there? I think so, Sam, not Sam answered. The sound of her own voice startled her. It was foreign yet familiar. Do you know who you are? A melodic female voice asked. They called you Alice, Sam, not Sam said. Not her name, your name, the gruff woman snickered. I think they said your name is Delula. Well, memory retention is working, Delula said. Those are our names, Alice said both aloud as well as within her head. Can you tell us your name? I'm Sam. No, that's wrong. Who am I? Can I look at myself in a mirror? Keep the blindfold on, the gentle voice said firmly. Was that Aisha? Sam, not Sam asked nervously. Why does that name sound familiar but not her voice? I'm Sam but not Sam, she was getting frantic. Who am I? That's the real question, isn't it? The familiar voice said wistfully. Who are you, or more specifically, which are you? I don't understand, Sam, not Sam whimpered. The brain waves are diverging again, Delula said in alarm. Put her back under, Alice said irritably. I'll try again. Sam, not Sam struggled to stay awake as they administered more sedative. I'm sorry, Aisha said. It's just not working. The ritual worked, the familiar woman sounded furious. Calm down, Aisha said in an even tone. There wasn't much of her left inside those stones. I refuse to lose her, the familiar woman yelled. I've earned a lot of favors. I'll collect on every last one if I have to. We know where they were headed last. Assemble a fleet and let me collect what's mine. You're willing to start a war over this, Aisha scolded. We can't even be sure she's there. The women's voices began to fade as Sam, not Sam, struggled to remain conscious. Authorize me to send Prask to find and collect the exile. Prask? That name sounded. Green. What a strange thought. Sam, not Sam, lost her battle against the drugs. Section break. Sam, not Sam stirred. The fabric felt lighter against her skin, or maybe her mind's connection to her body had grown stronger. She could feel her feet move and her hands clench and release. Whatever they were doing seemed to be helping. The room was quiet. They must all be resting or busy elsewhere. They said something about a memory graft. Was it worth trying to remember herself if the women just planned to fill her with memories from someone else? Who would she be then? How can I know who I am if I don't know who I've been? Wait, who I've been, not who I was. Have I been more than one person? She couldn't tell the difference between her new and old memories. I need a mirror, she thought in desperation. I'm not even sure what I am. Please somebody help me. Sam, not Sam, scolded herself. One of the women had heard her thoughts earlier. The woman must be some sort of telepath. She should be more careful about thinking so loudly and forcefully she could be. Do not hurt, she heard inside her head. It felt like it would have a gravelly sound if she could hear it with her ears. How could she know what voice would belong with the thought? Maybe she was the telepath? Wouldn't that mean her body or brain is telepathic? That must be the original her. She listened for a few minutes but heard nothing. She was still alone, and her thoughts must have only been heard by the one recipient. She was able to ascertain a general direction the thought had come from, and what seemed to be their emotional state. That settles it. She must be telepathic. Maybe not an impressive one, but telepathic just the same. I won't hurt you, Sam, not Sam thought. She tried to think more gently this time. What is your name? It felt less frightened now. It seemed more curious and confused but still hesitant. Maybe it didn't understand the question. Sam, not Sam, considered, then thought. What are you called? Oh, it thought very slowly. With the strange gravelly sound of its thoughts, it was hard to tell exactly what it was trying to say. They were able to communicate, but she felt like something in her head was translating both incoming and outgoing thoughts. She also felt confident the being was male. Had he said he was a Luhan? What's a Luhan? No, that wasn't it. There was more emphasis on the L sound. One. Can I just call you Lou? He responded with a noise that sounded like an E. Louie? It seemed calmer, more content. Mental fatigue was setting in. I'm getting tired. I have to sleep now. I'll talk to you again. Is that okay, Louie? As she started dozing off, she found herself wondering if her new friend really existed or if they were just a figment of her imagination. A remnant, maybe? Questions flooded through her mind as fatigue overtook her. Section break. Even in her dreams, everything was jumbled and distorted. Why had the familiar-sounding woman specifically asked her which she is? Of all the questions which perused her into her dreams, that singular question stood out from the rest. What did it mean, and why couldn't she see herself in her own dreams? She had to isolate a single memory within the maelstrom. Some hint of who she is or was. The locations and people shifted and changed so rapidly. There was one woman that appeared in more memories than anyone else. Maybe she was the one with the familiar voice? It seemed clear she'd known her the longest. She tried to force herself into a lucid dreaming state to reign in the chaos. Say my name. Who am I? Sam, not Sam, screamed within the dream. Everything seemed to be being consumed by darkness. One after the next, faces emerged, spoke a single word, and then sank back into the pitch. A dark-haired, brown-eyed Shamfarian said, Kiva. A green-skinned man with yellow eyes said, Princess. A silver-eyed, golden-skinned child said, Veshtaka. A blue-haired male said, Kayla. A white-furred caiman said, Vicky. A green-haired woman said, Bruha. A tan-furred Karzan said, Lady Kali. Good, finally a last name. A stern-looking lamentic said, Samari. I think I have it. That must be it. I'm Lady Samari Kali. That was her last conscious thought before entering into deep slumber. Section break. She stirred in her sleep after hearing a banging noise. She was still dreaming, suffering from sleep paralysis but not quite lucid. The sheet felt strange against her hardened nipples. Something about that seemed strange, but not nearly as strange as the dream itself, in which she'd met an unusually short Karzan and proceeded to have sex with them. It was the same whose face in the dark had called her Lady Kali. She'd been so sure she was a subterran of some sort, but when she'd seen her reflection in the surface of the bar, she saw a black vulpine looking back at her. She recalled an intense feeling while mounting the Karzan. It was a feeling in her tail. The only hair she could feel was behind her back. She was laying on it, and it definitely felt like it was attached to her head. In the dream she knew she'd gone with 3 cannonoids. Just who or what was she, and who had she been? She felt like the little Karzan was somehow important to her, but didn't know how or why or who they were. Samari heard a soft familiar voice say, I've cleared the Viper for departure on track 8. Take these. I need proof. Eris has volunteered to bring you back to Kaylani space through the T-Tarn Stargate. There was a faint clanking noise, then the sound of a door closing gently. She fell back asleep to the soothing rhythmic sound of someone breathing softly nearby. Captivity Day 11. Kali. They had replaced their brainwashers again while she was asleep. This was the 3rd set of screens. When the first set was replaced, they took the hint and seemed to realize that 3 propaganda videos playing loudly were only going to make her angry. They set the replacements, installed on day 4, to rotate randomly between the government channels, faced them in 3 directions away from the center of the containment area, and reduced the volume a bit. It was frustrating, but at least it gave her a choice of which bit of mental reconditioning she was willing to put up with to pass the time. That lasted until they finally put something interesting on one of the channels, then changed it randomly, and didn't have it on either of the other 2 screens when they all changed. Kali smashed all the screens as a display of her disapproval. They left the shattered bit of electronics laying on the floor long enough. She was wondering if they were hoping she'd find a way to kill herself with the broken shards, but that would be problematic. Riddled Infinity would just choose another sucker to fail to complete the supposed prophecy. It was all so stupid. It only persisted because of the people that believed in it with such vigor they were blinded by the truth. It wasn't real. It was never meant to be a future prediction. The initial structure was derived from Johnny nursery rhymes. Her understanding kept evolving over time. While on Midguard she'd seen one of the earliest versions engraved on a temple wall. The holographic tree in the center of the room was a projection of a living replica of a tree featured within the wall art. In its original form it could easily be interpreted as a warning that Keralis would be destroyed in an unavoidable cataclysm, but everyone would be too busy fighting ancient conflicts to see what was coming. It sounded foreboding, and the petty squabbles certainly were still keeping everyone distracted, but there was a key piece all the supposed oracles and seers had missed. The writing on the walls was predicting events that already happened millions of years ago. It might have stopped repeating itself if people stopped trying to fulfill it and just leave it in the past. The new screens still weren't active at midday. If they left her without distraction, that could be a problem for everyone. They were keeping her here like a beast in a cage. They seemed intent on trying to tame or control her, while she was just trying to hold the reins on her own mind. Where in the powers had that darkling gone? She hadn't seen it in around a week, and her other self was still absent within her mind. Her thoughts were becoming more and more chaotic. Maybe the silence would give her some clarity to find a way out when feeding time came. Judging by the position of the sun, it should be soon. By this point, Kali would probably have been spending most of her time in her own private mindscape, but she had been too dependent on her knack to get her there. Since La Barth, nobody had visited her. She hadn't seen anyone, but she knew they were watching, although she had no idea who they were. Maybe if she pretended that she was rehearsing for a play, memorized the next broadcast they tried drilling into her head, and recite it for whoever's observing her, maybe then they'd let her go. She could just ask her Tejmare to pull all the garbage out of her head later. Kali sighed. As much as she missed her sister self, she missed Cyanide even more. Then again. "When are one of you going to tell me what you did to Syntholo?" Kali screamed as loudly as she could. "You told him to stay by my side, follow me around, and report my activities to you. He did that. So where the fuck is he now? What right do you have to insist people are loyal to you when you show them none in return?" There was no response, but there never is. It's not consent when there is no real choice, she grumbled. It would have been nice if anyone had the decency of telling her why she'd been confined. This had to be because of La Barth and his flawed predictions. She couldn't think of any other rational explanation, not that blindly listening to that Lupian was reasonable. Kali had liked the concepts behind the Dominion, but not anymore. She heard a brief buzz, then a whirring hum. It was apparently feeding time at their zoo of one. They had always been careful about making sure their drone didn't land too close to her. It had just passed through the barrier field at the top of the building, 60 feet above her. She glanced up at the drone, walked over and sat on one of the couches on the side next to a small table. The empty glass, plate and tray from the morning meal were still on the table. Kali was well aware they could make her life a lot more unpleasant, but it was worth the risk. She reached up and coiled her tail around the glass, resting her hands next to the tray while watching the drone. She already knew it had some sort of object avoidance program. As the drone released the clamps holding the new tray, Kali flung the plate just above the slim, rectangular machine while jumping through the air toward it, holding the old tray in both hands. She flung the glass just above it to keep it from taking off too early. The old tray slammed into the top of the drone, driving it downward into the new plate and glass underneath. Kali knelt on the tray, pinning the drone between the two trays. She could hear the metal turbines grinding against the contents of the lower tray. The glass shattered and the plate fragmented as the turbines popped and whirred and groaned until finally grinding to a stop. Kali coiled her black tail back around her waist as she jumped on top of the trays a couple times for good measure. She stepped back cautiously, removed the upper tray and stared down at the crippled drone. I didn't expect that to work, Kali said in confusion. That wasn't exactly what I had in mind. Well, I killed the drone and ruined my lunch. Now what? She looked up and frowned. She thought she'd be able to ride it up out of the building. In frustration, she flung it over her shoulder. It sailed through the force field and landed on the floor beyond. I hope they have more drones, she grumbled. She tossed the second tray toward the force field as a test. The barrier lit up where it impacted and the tray fell to the floor. There must be something inside the drone that allows them to pass through unhindered. It was probably a good thing she hadn't tried riding it up and out. She'd presumed they deactivated the top barrier to allow it to pass. Standing on top of it was unlikely to work. The drone would have to go through first. She'd have to give it more thought before trying again. The sparse furniture was bolted to the floor, so her ability to have a proper tantrum was sadly limited. She had nothing to eat or drink for her midday meal, but that wasn't going to completely stop her from the rest of her daily routine. She just had to decide which to do. She could pretend to go running with cyanide or imagine sparring with a partner of her choice. It wasn't that hard a decision. Kali walked to the edge of the field, held out her hand until she could feel the electricity of the barrier make the back of her hand tingle, closed her eyes and began her jog. Section break. You did that on the flight over, Lilac said. We're almost at the end of the path, Kali said rapidly. She heard a scraping sound, then a soft thud, but didn't bother to look. In her fantasy jog, they'd just reached the bowed trees, further than she had actually made it in reality. Kali opened her eyes, while walking her final loop around the room. Lilac was directing two workers to remove the drone on a hovering table. The workers were an unremarkable-looking Mongani and a Lupian she remembered seeing on the ship. Was she one of the server choices you offered me? Kali asked. Yes, Lilac sounded a little surprised. You said we. Who are you pretending to be jogging with? Is it Syntholo? Kali smiled. Walk with me and I might answer. Unless that's something else you have people do for you. I walked over here, Lilac scoffed. Did you? Kali teased. Don't you mean marched like a good little soldier? I chose to be here, Lilac insisted. Really? Kali scoffed. What do they do? Post random military assignments, or have you been demoted to drone collector? The truth? It's too late for that, Kali said as she finished her last lap, and started walking to her preferred couch. I'm done. Next time you're looking for an answer, it will have to be on my terms. Feel free to lie. Just make it a good one. The more outlandish the better. Nobody visits, nobody talks to me. I still haven't met that mistress of yours. She lied to get me here, tried to get me killed by the Xenon, then had one of her slaves lock me in this cage. The Kailani Dominion does not allow slavery, Lilac glared. Haven't you learned anything about us? Did you selectively forget who locked me in here? Kali smirked. Of course not. It was the Praetorian prefect, Lilac said. Seriously? You walked me in here, held me at gunpoint until the field was online, and you bear no responsibility. The responsibility falls on the person giving the order, Lilac countered, not the person that follows the instruction. Kali blinked in disbelief. You really are a slave and you can't see it. It must be nice to be able to deny culpability for your actions regardless of who gets hurt. There will be consequences for this. I wanted to be an ally to Kailani. It's a shame that didn't work out. I'm sorry people like you will get caught up in what's coming. Really? Lilac scoffed. And just who do you think would threaten us? We have mutual defense pacts with the Xenon and the Midnight Fellowship. What percentage of your Xenon friends have I already killed? I didn't even fire a shot. It's funny how the people that are just following orders always die first. Oh, that reminds me, what did you people do to this nation's most loyal servant? Syntholo. I didn't come here to fight with you, Lilac said. I was hoping we could be friends. We could have been, Kali snarled, but that was before you put me in here. If you're sincere, tell me what they did to Syntholo. I can't, Lilac said sadly. Sorry, if you want a second chance, that is the first stepping stone on the path to forgiveness. I'll ask around, Lilac shrugged. That's the best I can do. I asked to be assigned to you, then I was sent on assignment. This is my first day back in system. I still have to follow orders. If I don't, they'll just put you back under the care of the people that have been avoiding you. I don't think either of us want that. I'll look into the Syntholo situation, but I don't think you're going to like me for a bit longer. It'll be a few days before we can replace the hardware you broke earlier. I can't guarantee lunch until the new one arrives. There's nothing I can do about that. If you're serious about this, you're going to have to prove yourself to me. Who is your Tejmare? Are you kidding? Cully laughed. Please don't hate me for following orders, Lilac said mournfully. If you tell me who they are, I won't have to do this. I hope you enjoy the show. Do what? Cully asked obstinately. You haven't even begun to earn that knowledge. We got word that a ship registered to the Lamentic Empire is on its way here. Unless you tell me who your Lamentic lover is, I'm going to have to close your skylight until we know they're not coming here looking for trouble, Lilac said flatly. Cully smirked. It was a bad ploy. It would give them an excuse to shoot down Cyan if it is her. Chances were it wasn't her. She'd send Prask or someone completely unconnected to either of them. Oh well, Cully shrugged. Do what you have to do, but next time you come to see me, don't come wearing your slave clothes. This is my military uniform. That's what I said, Cully scoffed. The roof closed over as Lilac turned and walked away. After she walked out of the building, everything went completely silent and black, except for the soft blue glow of the 15 stones that remained in the pouch hidden under her armored skirt. She doubted they'd show up on low light or infrared monitoring devices. She didn't need the stones for light. Her captors seemed to think sensory deprivation could break her. She had told Lilac she could see energy flows. Had the woman forgotten? Cully refocused her eyes. With all of the lights turned off, the force field and knack suppression rings surrounding the area looked very different. Maybe she did remember and was trying to tell Lady Darkseid something in the only way she could. The runes within the stone ring of the knack suppression field didn't glow as she expected they would. The stones glowed. The runes were an inky speckled black when examined with her Eldrani eyes. The stonework that the ring was made of was a dimly glowing substance that reminded her of chocolate poured over fruit. She'd been looking at it all wrong. Each tile was a mystrium plate. The stone ring was entirely superficial. It was just a coating poured over the plates. The interior was revealed after the rune was chiseled out of the coating. The sides of the plates had to be bare so the mystrium tiles could connect, like completing an electronic circuit. If a single plate could be shifted far enough out of alignment, it would break the circle and disable the suppression field. The force field was a different problem. It was interesting to see in the complete blackness that the field wasn't constant but a pulsing flow that moved counterclockwise. It overlapped at its strongest and weakest points. She wasn't sure what to do with this new information, but it was interesting and something to busy her mind with through the remainder of the day and into the night.